Welcome everybody, this is GTM here. We're going to be going over a basic tutorial on lighting in 3D Max. So we're going to cover some of the more common tools. So I'm going to go ahead and launch up 3D Max here. Now when working with lights, we want to be familiar with a few areas in 3D Max. First of all, most important area is right over here where it says lights. I'll click on the light tools here, right here, and you're going to notice it's going to say photometric, but we're going to be working in standard most of the time. Photometric's mainly for like architectural work and stuff, so we're going to switch that to standard. And I'm going to introduce you to some of the lights here. Now, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and just throw me a plane on the ground. And I'm going to make that plane one by one. Let's increase the size of that. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and just throw a few objects in the scene. And maybe a sphere. Line that up properly. Alright, I like to prep up my objects too, so. I'm going to hit F4 so we can see our edges, and I'm just going to go ahead and set those up. Alright, I'm just hitting Alt W here, and I'm turning off G. Alt W, by the way, is to minimize and maximize, and I turn G on and off, for your grids. Alright, let's go back to our lights. Now I'm just going to introduce you, I'm going to go ahead and lay down a few lights here. Now, this is our target spot, and basically what it is a target light, like track lighting. And usually when I lay down lights in the scene, I'm going to go ahead and, I usually lay them from the top. So I'm going to go ahead and just click, drag. As you can see, it's a target. I'm going to drop that right in the center and raise it up from the front view. Now, as you notice, the minute you drop in a light in 3D Max, the default lighting goes away, and the only light in the scene now, based off our perspective view, is that spotlight. And if I click on my light here, I can actually position it, and you can see it adjusting on the geometry. And this would be known as like your key light, depending on which light you use. All right, I'm gonna go to my perspective window, so I'm gonna hit Alt W. Now, if you hit Control L, that turns back off, turns on your default lighting system again. Hit Control L again, so just do that a couple times. You can see you can turn on and off, and you're going to do that, especially when working lights. Sometimes you want to work on your geometry again and be able to see what's going on. So you might switch these on and off by hitting Control L. All right. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the light properties here. So I'm going to go to, once you pick a light, for example, I just scrolled out, by the way. I'm picking my light. Every light has a modifier, so if I click on it, you can go to modifier, and then you can see all the parameters of that light, which you got everything from general, intensity, color, spotlights parameters, advanced effects, shadow parameters, shadow map parameters, atmosphere effects, and so forth. Alright, let's start off with the general parameters. As you can see, this is a spotlight. The lights are turned on and it's targeted. You can switch these on the fly, so if I want to switch it to a directional, which is mainly used for sunlight or moonlight or outdoor lighting, you can go to Omni, which is known as a point light system, where it lights 360 or all the way around. Alright, I'm going to go back to spot though. And as you can see here, we have shadows. Our shadows are turned off. So if I render this out, and I'm just going to hit my little teapot here. When I render that out, you can see we have no shadows off our geometry. We just have the light kicking off the geometry itself. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that on and then render that out. Now you can see we have some shadows. Now notice our shadows are somewhat a little jaggedy, but and it's not quite on our box, but I'll get into more detail about that. Just want to let you know that's how you turn on your shadows. Alright, let's go on to the next parameters here. Oh, also the exclude light, or exclude button here. If you click that, this basically lets you know I can exclude certain objects from that light. So maybe I didn't want the box to be affected by that light, let alone cast shadows. So I put the box in there and I hit OK. Now if I render it out, notice the box doesn't cast a shadow. So that box is no longer affected by that light. So if I go back to exclude again, I can actually do both. Hit OK and render. And now the light doesn't even hit the box, let alone cast a shadow. Now sometimes you might want to do that when you're working with certain scenes and objects. You don't want certain lights to, multiple lights to hit a certain object and blow it out of your scene. And I learned this based off my instructor. I had an instructor named Lee Lanier, which was the lead modeler and lighter for Pixar at the time, and he did all the lighting from Ants and the first Shrek. And he had taught us, like in the movies Shrek or Ants or any Pixar movie, most characters have their own 3-point light setup that follows them around. And we'll talk about 3-point light setups later on. Now, but those 3-point light setups are just on the characters, and everything else in the scene is excluded. So their light setup does not hit any other object in the scene. All right, hopefully that made somewhat sense. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put that back in there. I'm gonna hit OK. Give it one last test render. Okay, we're back to normal. Alright, I am going to, let's get this up. Alright, I'm going to go to my intensity and color options now. Now this is your multiplier. This is the intensity of the light. So if I crank that up, you notice it gets hotter and your light tends to get blown out. So I'm going to hit render. Whenever you see any kind of white hot spots on your scene or objects, you know that your lights are basically too hot. So that's kind of telling you, hey, turn me down, these lights are too hot. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that at a 1. And of course you got your color swatch here where we can actually change the color of the light. So for example, if I wanted like a green light here, you notice it kind of changes the tint here. So if I render that out, now we have somewhat of a green light. Now this is good for when you start doing some dramatic lighting, you got multiple lights in your scene, you can switch the colors around. For now, let's just go ahead and keep that at white. Or let alone, this is good to simulate certain colors, like, this might possibly be, moonlight. And then you come down here, this could possibly, go over here to a slight orange, that could be somewhat like sunset. And so forth. Alright, but let's keep that at white. Alright, also you have your type here. Get your none, inverse, and inverse square. So none meaning that light continuously lights forever. So if I were to hit another object in the scene, or throw an object in the scene here, let's put another sphere way out here, that light technically should be able to hit that sphere. See? As to where, if I switch that to an inverse, that kind of takes the strength down of the light, so it may not very well carry over there and hit that. See, it barely hits it. Now, the way I was always taught, let me get rid of that, is, let's click on that light here. I usually use none lights for type none for the main key light and some basically when I'm lighting a scene. Your inverse are more of fill lights because you have to fake 3D light, and this will make more sense as we do our lesson plans. And then inverse square would be more of the point light, the point of generation of the light. And so when we get to the next lab that I record, this will make more sense. Alright, for now, our start level, I'll explain that. I'm going to switch this to, I'm going to delete this light here, and I'm going to put a Omni light in the scene. Alright, as you can see, turn on my shadows here. If I go to my intensity color here. Now, if I hit my start, you're going to see a green bounding box, or I'm sorry, green bounding sphere around that light, let alone, you know, if it's a spotlight, you'll see the green. It's kind of like the green light, or the green cage, or guideline right there. That basically is explaining how far that light will carry over. So let me switch this to an inverse, and this would be fill. Now I'm going to crank up the multiplier, because when you turn it inverse, the light is not as strong. I'm going to crank that up a bit. Now, see how that light hits the sphere? Now watch when I crank up my start level. You can see it's starting to carry over and hit the box. So that's kind of like letting you know how far you want that light to carry based off its start level. I'm going to go ahead and render that out. There we go. As you can see, our light is a little too hot, so I'm going to crank that down. Alright, and then I'm going to crank this start level up higher, and then you can see how, you know, it's covering more of the box now. Alright, let's go ahead and bring that back down, and I'm going to go switch back to a spot and turn it to a target. I'm going to go ahead and move that target right back up here. Let's get it right onto the objects. I'm just moving the target. Alright, back to where we're at. I'm going to go ahead and raise that up, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my start level just for now. Alright, let's switch that back to none. And like I said, we'll get more into the near attenuations and far attenuations. So let's go on to the next area, our spotlight parameters. Probably one of the most important parts of the light. Now, as you can see, we have a hot spot and fall off. This is based off your, you know, how to work with your shadows here. So I'm going to move this over just slightly. Now look at my scene. I'm going to go ahead and give myself a render here. And notice the edge right here. Let me kind of zoom out so you can see it. Notice we have a hard shadow edge. So if I spread my hot spot and fall off, and then render that out, you get a nice bleed on my shadow. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do that again. I'm going to tighten my hot spot, and fall off, give it a render, and as you can see I have a hard edge shadow. I'll go ahead and spread it again. Basically I'm going to click on my mouse, crank it up, while I'm still holding the mouse, bringing it back down. I'm going to render it out, and then you can see I have a nice soft shadow. Alright, we're going to go ahead and continue here. Notice on my spotlight here, you have circle and rectangle. You can actually switch these two to give you more of a rectangle look and circle. This will play in a factor when you're starting to line up, you know, spotlights or directional lights through windows and so forth. So I'm going to give me a quick render here. All right, let's go back to circle here. Minimize that now, spotlight parameters. Let's go to the advanced effects. This area here we'll get into later, but you notice you have a projector map. This way we'll be able to project images coming from the light, or like volume, you know, shadows and stuff like that. Well, in one of the later lesson plans we'll cover that. Alright, right here in the shadow parameters, notice our density is at 1.0. I'm going to go ahead and render that out. And you can see the density of our shadow. Let me zoom up so I get a little closer. Alright, now I can actually bring down my density. Let's say 0.5, which is going to be half that 1.0. I'm going to render that, and we have a lighter shadow. This will play in a factor when you're trying to make your shadows more realistic. Alright, and also you have shadow color. So I'm going to crank this back up to at least 1.0. Double click on this color swatch, and I can actually change my shadow color. Now this will help out like if you're lighting things with crystal glasses or glasses with tinted colors, that the shadow might tend to bleed the color of the actual, whatever the transparent graphic may be. Like I said, but mental ray also is another render in there that covers caustics and stuff. So to give you, something that'll give you more of a realistic light render or refraction. Anyways, I'm going to go back to, just let you know you can change your shadow color there. I'm going to go back to black. Alright, and also you have, let's go down to shadow map parameters. Now that was shadow parameters. Now this is your shadow map parameters. First part I want to discuss is your bias. Now watch when I render this out. Look at our shadow. It's kind of, here, let me get a different angle. It kind of is not quite connected to the corner there. So I usually start off at a 0.1 with my shadows, and that's basically gonna attach my shadow to the actual object itself. So if I were to go like a higher, say like a bias of like a 3 or so, you can see your shadow jumps off it. I mean, I guess this may play a factor if you want certain shadows to be able to appear on a certain object that's not hitting it. To be honest, I've never really adjusted that too much. I've always kept it at 1.0. Now the next thing I want to explain is your shadow size here. Now you got to remember, shadow maps, this is the kind of shadows we're working with, and as you can see, if you drop them down, we have different types of shadows. But shadow maps, if you go to the shadow map parameters, 512, what that is doing is giving the illusion that you're seeing a shadow, and it's putting actually a bitmap graphic on the ground. And a 512 map is pretty low res. So you always multiply those by 2. So the more, the bigger the size of the map, you need more memory to be able to render. And nowadays machines have a lot of memory. So if I were to actually multiply that by 2, so 1024, and render that, you're gonna see the details of my map are getting a little sharper. And then you multiply that by 2 again, it's 2048. Now you can see we're getting some really crisp shadows. And let me actually get this to 1.1. Alright, and those are usually good settings. What you're seeing right here is a good standard setting, 0.1, maybe 1024 or 2048. I'm going to work with 2048. And then your sample range is the spread of your shadow. And usually when you want realistic shadows, depending on the light situation, you want your shadows to tend to bleed off. So I'm going to crank that up to say about 7. And then look at my shadows right around here. As you can see, well, that's a little tight, but they're starting to bleed off. So if I were to crank that up, say, to like 15, now you can see they're kind of spreading out. Here, let's try 30 so we can see a big difference. There you go. Now you see your shadows bleeding off a bit. Alright, a good starting point for me usually is anywhere from 4 to 7, I suppose. And that all depends on how far your light is actually from your object. So that can vary. Alright. Now, of course, you have two-sided shadows and so forth. Absolute bias map. I never really, I guess that would play a factor depending on the situation. Alright, let's see, atmospheres and effects. We don't need to worry about that right now. Okay, so the most important areas I want you to focus on when working with your lights are obviously your intensity and color, your inverse squares, which we'll cover more, your start level, your parameters, especially your hotspot and fall offs, your circle, rectangular. Your shadow parameters, I usually start off at 0.7 always. And my shadow map parameters, I always start off at 0.1, and usually 1024 is a good starting point. And sample range, like I said, that can vary 4 to 7. That's usually a good starting point to set up your lights. All right.